All right, welcome to our overview on natural ADD relief. Now, this is going to be geared more towards younger population of people because that's typically what I see for this issue. It does definitely exist during high school, after high school, college, and into adulthood. These issues definitely aren't as obvious or talked about at the adult level, but they definitely exist. So you can apply the same no matter what the age is. With ADD, at a very superficial level, it is a neurotransmitter issue. So, what are neurotransmitters? Maybe you've heard of acetylcholine. You probably haven't heard of acetylcholine, but maybe you've heard of serotonin. Like antidepressant drugs are supposed to keep more serotonin around. It makes you feel good. We're going to talk about three particular neurotransmitters that are potentially responsible for these issues. Just looking ahead a little bit, having issues with neurotransmitters are always a secondary issue. What does that mean? So while the medical model may be to trap more GABA around, or even the natural methods, there's herbs that help keep more neurotransmitters around that make us feel good or make us feel less anxious or help us concentrate better. It's still not addressing the root issue. The root issue is something is running you down on those neurotransmitters. And that is what needs to be addressed. If you get rid of those nutrient drains, you get rid of those things that drive dysfunction, then you don't need to take a supplement the rest of your life. You don't need to take medications the rest of your life, at least with these particular things. So with ADD, we'll start with most common to least common. I actually see, and not everybody looks at it this way, but I actually see ADD more often as a GABA issue. GABA is the most prevalent and most effective inhibitory neurotransmitter. So what happens when you don't have enough inhibition? You can't tune other things out. This is the child that's sitting in their seat and can't concentrate because they're thinking about the fan or the air conditioning unit that's going on behind them. They can't tune that information out, and so they're stuck concentrating on that and not on what they're supposed to. So these people don't respond well to Ritalin and Adderall and those other things because they are already hyper-focused. They're just hyper-focused on the wrong things. They can't tune out that information. But the other side of it is the acetylcholine side. So this is a child that is sitting in class, they're staring at their teacher, and they are trying their best. Maybe the first 5-10 minutes of the class they're doing well, but then their brain fatigues and they can't concentrate because of brain fatigue or brain endurance issues. These same people will have memory issues. They won't be able to recall things very well. That is more on the acetylcholine side. Either way, identifying these aren't super important because when we get into it, we'll be doing all of the same things to address all of these types of ADD. But it is good to kind of know and identify them as... it also helps identify things as they improve. So you can actually ask your child, you get more clarity, and I think that's important. So if we look at the bottom, I kind of have how your body naturally makes these in the wild, so to speak. You are always taking protein, and you are always making neurotransmitters with that protein. There are always cofactors like vitamins and minerals, that's the purpose of them, to turn that protein into this particular type of protein, which is a neurotransmitter. So in the case of GABA, you've got glutamate, which is actually an excitatory neurotransmitter. So you can imagine if you have even more excitation, even more of a lack of inhibition by not being able to convert glutamate into GABA. In higher levels, higher problems with this, it turns into anxiety and trouble shutting your brain off at night, can't fall asleep. That's typically what we talk about more in adults, but it does happen in kids as well. So all of those things run together, and taking something like magnesium can be helpful. But again, what are you running down on? What is running you down on magnesium, zinc, or B6? Magnesium is probably a little bit more common. In fact, there's a whole supplement dedicated to the word calm, and that's just magnesium blend. With acetylcholine, you have a choline backbone, which is prevalent in eggs, so you can take some eggs, and you need some B vitamins and some manganese to combine the acetylcholine to make, or the acetyl-CoA to make acetylcholine. So acetyl-CoA, if they have an acetylcholine issue, it's tightly regulated with blood sugar. Acetyl-CoA is part of the TCA cycle. A lot of cool biochemistry that you don't need to know, but basically just know that those particular ADD people are even higher. It's always a pie chart of problems, but a bigger portion of that pie chart is dedicated to blood sugar typically. Again, you can take some of these things, but it's not really addressing the root issue. Some might say, well, they do make GABA supplements. Why don't I just take some GABA? GABA, while it is a amino acid or protein, it is too big to cross the blood-brain barrier. So you really shouldn't have much significant improvement by taking GABA. If you do, then you probably have something called leaky brain, and you can Google and learn all about that. It's similar to leaky gut. But inflammation in the brain, breaking down the tight junctions, and opening up that problem for allowing things in that shouldn't be there. Okay. Dopamine, not as common. Dopamine is your motivation neurotransmitter. It is a lack of interest that is causing your inability to concentrate. These people who have dopamine issues have temper issues. They get agitated very easily. Like I said, don't see this a whole lot. I mean, you see temper issues a lot, but I don't see this being the root neurotransmitter. But they're all involved and they're all at play, and you address them all in a very similar fashion. So in this particular case, if they do have these issues, then you want to consider a dopamine fast. That would be removing things that stimulate dopamine, so that when your body's more prone to stimulating dopamine when it's in something less comfortable than sugar and video games, you're going to be more responsive to dopamine. You're not going to bleed off as much with it. Again, you're taking L-Dopa, a protein, amino acid, and turning it into a neurotransmitter, dopamine, magnesium, zinc, and B6. Very common there. B1 is in there as well. So cofactors. So you're starting to see a trend there with the magnesium, zinc, B6. Very common. Required to make serotonin as well. Dopamine you see tied with depression a little bit, but it's not a I can't get myself out of bed depression. It's typically I get myself out of bed, but I have trouble doing much else outside of that. I'm going to work, but I'm not doing much to go above and beyond that. With things that drain cofactors, these are the nutrient drains that we talked about. These are the things that need to be addressed in order to correct these issues as a root issue. These things can't be traced any further back. So we talk about inflammation, blood sugar, and stress hormones. That's the trifecta. If you can address those completely, then almost every time, all of the time, you're gonna correct this issue. Inflammation is very broad. There are two things generally that stimulate inflammation. There you've got, as far as the immune system goes, pathogens and damage, tissue damage. Well, you think about kids, what kind of damage, tissue damage are they going to have? Well, just like if you have, I hate to use COVID as an example, but you have COVID, your body responds to that pathogen, starts creating inflammation. You get these long haulers who, even after they've gotten over the infection, are still producing inflammation. There's still tissue damage there. they're having trouble getting over it. And then the other problem is that inflammation stimulates inflammation. So whatever the root issue was that stimulated that, it's good to start getting ahead of it. We'll talk about it in more detail in the next slide. Blood sugar, really important too. I probably see low blood sugar, definitely see low blood sugar more often. Starting to see more insulin issues in kids, which is not good. But generally, just addressing things from a low blood sugar, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is significant. All right, talking about stress hormones. Stress hormones tied together with blood sugar and inflammation, so addressing those two really could resolve a big stress hormone issue. Hopefully you don't have to go into the emotional side of things, but if that is a factor, then it really should be looked at. So we're not going to talk much about that. We're going to focus more on the metabolic side and the kind of the easy stuff to fix. So we'll look at the next slide. Talked about supplements and how the priority is to address those nutrient drains, the root issues, and then the goal of supplementation is to temporarily assist in the removal of a nutrient drain, or the reduction of the associated symptoms. So if taking something makes you feel better, you can take it while you're trying to address it. I'm cool with that. I just don't want people to become reliant on those things. So very basic things to do that seem to be very effective for most people in reducing inflammation would be to remove the trigger. Those can be food triggers. Most commonly you see gluten, dairy, and sugar. You have things that are inflammatory accelerators. Those are stress hormones, which we'll talk about in the next slide or the one after that. Insulin, which we will talk about in the next slide, and then excessive NSAIDs, which you don't see a lot in kids, hopefully. Taking too much aspirin, too much ibuprofen because they're in chronic pain or because they were told to take one a day can actually facilitate production of leukotrienes, which is another inflammatory contributor. It's more chronic, slower acting than prostaglandins. So good to reduce those things if possible. Aid in the clearance of inflammation. So that's when you're supplementing with fish oil. How does your body make fish oil? It takes the good fats that you eat and converts them with the magnesium, zinc, B6. There's a few others in there, but again, just to kind of hammer it home, in order to make fish oil on your own, you need magnesium, zinc, B6. If you're too busy breaking down stress hormones or dealing with your blood sugar issue, then your body's going to be even less able to control inflammation naturally. You can consider turmeric or resveratrol. Those are really good because they inhibit those interleukins that turn those inflammatory pathways on. So you could do that temporarily as you're trying to get ahead of things. Totally fine. Number two, the big one, stabilizing blood sugar. Most people will be in this first category. You will see a fasting glucose of lower than 85 typically, but if they have these symptoms, then it's not even relevant or important because they are having those problems at least at certain times of the day. You're just not pinning it on blood. So, as you get further along with those issues, when you get the low blood sugar problems, you start seeing people having trouble staying asleep. They'll wake up in the middle of the night between 1 and 3. Basically what happens is the blood sugar drops below a certain marker. In order to correct that blood sugar, because that's a very important thing to keep tightly regulated, your body produces stress hormones like cortisol and acutely epinephrine, and that immediately starts increasing glucose levels in your blood, which is good. So you've corrected that issue. However, you just produced a lot of stress hormones that now you have to deal with. Those don't turn into other things. They just need to get broken down in the liver. How does your body break those things down in the liver? There's 3 pathways, but there are full of magnesium, zinc, and B6. So another nutrient drain. So as far as deciding which category somebody is in, if you are a normal weight or lower, underweight, you're more likely to be in this low blood sugar category. If you are overweight, you can still have low blood sugar issues, but more commonly you're going to see the high blood sugar issues. So, the good thing is if you follow these instructions below, eating 3 meals balanced, 5 hours apart with no snacking. Those 3 meals should contain protein and fat, anchoring in protein and fat, and you can still have carbs in there too. They just need to be surrounded by fat, because if you just had a Nutri-Grain bar, your blood sugar is going to come up and it's going to come right back down. There's nothing keeping that blood sugar where it should be. So definitely eat your bacon and eggs for breakfast, and you can still have your Nutri-Grain bar, but don't just eat that. You should be able to last 5 hours. That child should not be hungry after 5 hours. They should be like, it's time for lunch. And they just eat. And then same thing with dinner. It's time for dinner. Geez. If you are starving by lunch, you didn't do a good enough job for breakfast, you need to eat more. Undereating is a problem too, or at least undereating at the wrong times. So no snacking. You don't see this a lot in kids, but overtraining, excessive exercise can produce excessive stress hormones. And in this low blood sugar side, that is something to watch out for. It would be a negative thing. Fasting would be a negative thing for this particular group of people. You definitely want to make sure you're in those 3 balanced meals. If you're on the high blood sugar side, fasting is okay and in fact beneficial. I always subscribe to at least that 8-hour eating window. You can narrow it even tighter if you want. With kids, like I said, that's kind of hard to control, but you do your best. We already said no sugar, but definitely no sugar if you have high blood sugar. Goes without saying. Commit to some exercise. So in this case, if low blood sugar people should kind of avoid too much exercise, people with high blood sugar should avoid sedentary exercise. So they need to be more active. So at least doing like 10-minute walks, and you need to progressively increase that over time. You need to demand more to demand more of your body. So all of that makes sense. The supplements for blood sugar issues, with 2 polar opposite problems, you need 2 different types of supplements. So what we typically do with low blood sugar, other than like the magnesium, zinc, B6 that kind of help stabilize things or help your body turn glycogen into glucose to correct that blood sugar issue. Artichoke extract is good because that contains glucuronic acid, which is one of those 3 pathways. Glucuronidation breaks down stress hormones in the liver. So as you're bringing those stress hormones up, your body's able to it has this available glucuronic acid to break down those stress hormones, so it doesn't have to make it from scratch, which further is taxing your blood sugar issue. In the high blood sugar side, the focus should be in improving insulin sensitivity. Supplements that help with that are chromium, lipoic acid, and berberine. I like berberine. That's the one I've got highlighted because it also inhibits interleukin-6, which is one of those things that turns inflammatory pathways on. So you can inhibit that, you get a double whammy. So again, magnesium, zinc, B6 is important for blood sugar issues. Talked about this a little bit with reducing stress hormones. There are 3 broad categories that will stimulate stress hormones. Any deviation away from homeostasis or being normal, your body will kick on this HPA axis. Your brain tells your pituitary gland to tell your adrenal glands to produce more stress hormones to pay attention to this issue or correct a particular issue. So emotional, talked about that a little bit. Hopefully kids aren't dealing with too much of that. And then at the end, the physical side, hopefully they're not in chronic pain or having issues with that. You stub your toe, stress hormones are obviously going to come up. If you're in pain all the time, your body's constantly producing stress hormones. That needs to be addressed if that's an issue. On the chemical side, the metabolic side, that's what we talked about already. The low blood sugar particularly stimulates stress hormone production, which we talked about. Inflammation, believe it or not, you've heard of cortisone shots, you've heard of prednisone. These are things that reduce inflammation. Cortisol acutely should be anti-inflammatory. Problem is when you produce it chronically, you can become resistant to it and you're less responsive to it. It's less anti-inflammatory over time. Just like insulin resistance, just like with any hormone, if you produce too much of it for too long, your body becomes less sensitive to it, which is supposed to be a good thing. But long term, definitely not in this particular case. So, talked about all those. With stress hormones, you can always take something like ashwagandha is the most popular adaptogen by far. Adaptogens, if you didn't know, whether you are the person that is very actively stimulating stress hormones and need to chill out, ashwagandha or any adaptogen for that matter works to lower in a heightened amount of stress hormones. Or some people have no energy in the morning, can't get out of bed, and it's because they're not producing enough stress hormones in the morning. So it can be both energetic and calming at the same time, which is kind of cool, and that's why people like to take it, and it's one of the most popular supplements by far because of its benefits. You take ashwagandha when you have problems. So if you have trouble with energy, you want to take it at those times that you would have trouble energy. Either afternoon tanking or morning can't get out of bed, that'd be energy. Can't fall asleep at night, try ashwagandha. Waking up in the middle of the night, try ashwagandha. Okay? Makes sense. All right. Dysbiosis. This is the inflammatory factory that's going on in this particular person's gut. If they're having gut symptoms, definitely be looking at this. If they are not, it might still be going on and they've not yet developed symptoms. Nice thing is that when you're addressing these imbalances, already cutting out the sugar, dairy, and gluten can help with reducing some of the issues here. But in general, dysbiosis is an imbalance between the good and the bad. You hear about taking probiotics. That is increasing the good in the area, but it doesn't address the bad. It doesn't reduce the overgrowth. If you had mold growing on the wall, you're not going to paint over it. That doesn't address the issue. You need to clean the walls. So I suggest, and with my patients, we use antimicrobials. The ones that I've suggested are both antifungal and antibacterial, so they get rid of the bad, help scrub those walls. Usually use them for 4 to 6 weeks, up to 8 weeks. You can take them for a long time, but that's typically how long we'll take them. And especially if you've removed those trigger foods. So you also don't want to be scrubbing the walls with sugar because that will help the mold proliferate. You want to remove the triggers and things that would feed the overgrowth, and you want to reduce and clean with those antimicrobials. So like I said, it usually only takes about 8 weeks to get ahead of it. If they are recurrent, then that's a whole nother ball of wax that you can get into. But if you're addressing all of these things, you should be getting ahead of it. So symptoms, if you're not aware, for digestive issues would include bloating, either going too often with bowel movements or not going for days on end, constipation, diarrhea. With kids, you see gas. You don't see indigestion very often or reflux. Sometimes you see nausea. Kids usually don't even know what bloating or indigestion feels like. But parents usually can pick up on the gas issues. So when you have that imbalance of the good and the bad, this is where that tissue damage can come in. Inflammation in an area, just like the COVID thing, inflammation in the lungs causes lung damage and then further progression of that damage. Same thing happens in the gut. You could have a perfect diet, and if you've not addressed the mold on the walls, it's going to continue to eat away at the walls. So then you get into leaky gut, and then long term turns into proteins getting into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there, and then you have that whole molecular mimicry, and then developing autoimmune issues. And not everyone's going to have those issues, but if you are more likely to develop them, you are increasing your likelihood by not addressing this. Okay, so people like to take glutamine. Again, continued importance of taking protein or taking enough protein in. Your gut is made out of, the gut lining that is made mostly out of glutamine, which is a protein. So we do use that. But again, if we just do the basics right, eat enough protein, then usually you can address that. Okay. Consider removing other aggravating foods besides the dairy, sugar, and gluten. If there's mold, fungus, candida, it's very common, especially in kids. You want to remove other forms of yeast and fermented foods. Usually fresh fruit is okay. You can keep that in. Some people will take it out. If they do have worse symptoms when they take in carbs, you need to be more careful with it. Maybe just limit it to just fresh fruit for a while. Again, just 6 weeks, 8 weeks. 6 weeks if you do really good usually. Malee is the one I got highlighted because it's antibacterial, antifungal, and it's actually antiviral as an added benefit. So that's the one I'll recommend if I'm going to recommend one, but there are literally 15 different ones you could choose from. So just to summarize the different things supplement-wise that you can take, we have the low and the high blood sugar stuff that we talked about. And then for all ADD issues, whether you have high or low blood sugar, making sure you eat enough protein. Doesn't have to be 100 grams, but at least 1 gram per pound of lean or ideal body weight. The magnesium, zinc, B6 you could take as cofactors, vitamins and minerals I would recommend. Ashwagandha, some sort of supportive root or herb you could take. So that would be like valerian root or passion flower are common GABA ones if it's a lack of inhibition, anxiety, those types of things. Turmeric is my anti-inflammatory herb that I'm picking. As far as gut issues, we're going with Malia, and you don't necessarily have to address that, but there's a lot of good research between ADD and the gut, and I think a lot of that comes from you address the inflammatory issue and you make a pretty big impact. So as a very broad summary, you're going to eat those balanced meals. You're going to cut out the offenders. You're going to support the gut, and you're going to cut out the inflammatory factor that might be going on there. If you can do those 3 major things, and you can kind of support the body with those supplements if you'd like, I'm going to link all of them together. I do get a little affiliate kickback on some of them, unless they go to Amazon. Then I'm just picking brands that I like. So feel free to get those if you want. Otherwise, you can either email me at doc@drtoddanderson.com. You can check out the rest of my website. I've got other articles on different conditions. This will be my 3rd webinar. I'm going to hopefully keep these going and put out some good information for everyone. If you want to sign up for my newsletter, I'll keep people informed on when those new ones come out. I don't spam people out with offers and no, I'm not selling anything on those, just putting out the webinars. Underneath this particular video, there should be a 20-minute discovery call where you can talk to me about your particular issues or whoever it is that you want. And that's totally free. That's just kind of a feeling it out and see if we're a good fit. If you're interested, sign up for a time for that while there's still some available. And other than that, I think that's it for this one. So thanks for joining me. And if you made it this far, thanks again.